Now, this morning we're thinking about the overflowing kindness and generosity that we have in the gospel. And I tried finding some pictures that express overflowing generosity, and here's one I couldn't resist. Have you seen it yet? Yeah, I thought that was quite good. That was sort of the best as regards overflowing. Here's another one that maybe you can relate to more. Dog food doesn't necessarily do it for you, so maybe one of those things might be, yeah, I think I like that. Overflowing generosity. I'm actually not doing the harvest. This is like my harvest festival, harvest Thanksgiving, because I'm actually not doing harvest this year because I'll be on sabbatical, God willing, but it's sort of quite relevant to what we're thinking about this morning. The book of Ruth. I love the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth tells a story of a woman who's widowed and she has nothing. And it tells how she comes under the wing, as it were, of a good and generous man who provides for her. And it's a love story, actually, a love story between Ruth and Boaz. And Boaz is her redeemer, her rescuer who's kind to her, and in the end who marries her. And Boaz just gives us a little picture of Jesus, what Jesus is like towards his people. And so I'm going to read a few verses of Ruth. Ruth chapter 2, I'll begin. You can turn to it if you like. It's on page 222. So as I read this, and we hear about Boaz and his kindness towards Ruth, what I want you to think about is the overflowing kindness of Jesus, okay? So if we could just have that on the screen, the overflowing kindness of Jesus, because that's the sort of headline that I want us to be thinking about as we hear about Boaz and his kindness towards Ruth. So I'll read from Ruth chapter 2, verse 14. Just a bit of context. It's harvest time. Ruth has been gleaning, and that means that she's been picking up just the odds and ends, the scraps left behind by the harvesters. God gave a really kind law to his people in the Old Testament that they should not harvest too thoroughly. They should leave some behind for the poor so they could come after the harvesters and pick for themselves. And so that's what Ruth's doing here. She's gleaning to take home some food for herself and for her mother-in-law because she's widowed. So Ruth chapter 2, verse 14, I'll read a few verses of this. And listen out for the overflowing kindness of Boaz, but really the overflowing kindness of Jesus, hinted at. And at mealtime Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat some bread and dip your piece in the wine." So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain. And she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, "Let her glean among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some of the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her." So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. That's about 22 litres. That's about 11 Coke bottles. Something like that. Big Coke bottles, that is. And she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw that what she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she'd worked, and said, "The man's name with whom I work today is Boaz." And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." And Ruth the Moabite said, "Besides, he said to me, 'You shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest.'" And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you should be assaulted." Press pause there. This was a bad time in the history of Israel. This was rotten time. People were really horrible to each other. If you were a destitute woman like Ruth was, you're in a bad way because the judges, this is the time of the judges, and people just did as they liked. Okay, but Boaz is different. Unpause. So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and the wheat harvests, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So that's just a little glimpse of this overflowing kindness of Boaz. Ruth then goes to ask Boaz if he will be her redeemer. All right, it's a lovely way. She says, "Spread your wings over me," she says. "Look after me. Let me come under your protection." To be like a person coming to Christ. Boaz is delighted at her request to be her redeemer, and he sends her on her way with yet more overflowing supplies of food. So chapter 3, verses 15 to 17. He said, bring the garment you're wearing and hold it out. So it's like holding out like an apron you're wearing. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave me, for he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" So there we have just the overflowing kindness of Boaz, hinting at the overflowing kindness of Jesus. We're going to think about that as we go through our service. We're going to be looking at the feeding of the 5,000 later and how we see similar things in that. It's a great story, Ruth. I recommend you read it sometime. 4 chapters, really excellent story. And if you keep a dry eye, you're better than I am.